Hey nerdy knitters, are you ready to knit a tip-to-tip shawl? You start out at one tip, you cast on stitches for this pretty lace edging, and then you increase along the edge to create the shape, the body of the shawl. And then when it's as big as you want, you start decreasing and working down to the other end, tip to tip. What's really great about this shawl construction is that it's so easy to customize the shape and the size of the shawl. So stick around for that because we'll be diving deep into how you can customize this shawl for yourself. But before we do that, let me just say, hey, I'm Tanya here at Nerdy Knitting. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a knitwear designer. My goal is to help you become a confident, adventurous knitter. Now to work this tip-to-tip shawl, you'll need US 6 or 4mm knitting needles. A circular needle is a good idea to hold all of the stitches, tapestry needle for weaving in your ends, and a stitch marker to keep track of your lace edging. And if you want to, you could have a second stitch marker just to keep track of the garter stitch edge at the top. It's not in the pattern, but it's an extra thing if you just need that to help you keep track of where you are. And you'll also need yarn. This pattern calls for a sock or fingering weight yarn. This sample used Neighborhood Fiber Company's Rustic fingering, which is a 100% superwash merino with 475 yards in the colorway Dupont circle. The pattern is written used all but a few yards of the skein of yarn. So if you're not matching gauge or you might want to make it larger, then you'll want to get a second skein of yarn. So this shawl is sort of divided into three parts. You're casting on here and working this way. We have a garter stitch edge right here, just 3 stitches. Then the body of the shawl is worked in a simple textured pattern. It doesn't really show up, but if you look at it closely, you can see some of the stitches look larger. It's a very simple pepper pattern. You're just adding some purl stitches in there for some texture on certain rows. And then you have the lace edging over here. This is the interesting part. We are increasing along this point, and that is giving us the shape of our shawl. And you'll keep doing that. So you've repeated the lace edging 8 times, and then you work a section where you just work straight. You stop increasing at this point, and you continue just to work the shawl body the way it is, and working that lace edging a few times. And then you start going in the other direction and you decrease. You're decreasing this shawl body. You're still working that lace edging and your edge stitches until you're right down just to a few stitches again. So to get started for this shawl, you cast on 15 stitches to start. You work 1 row where you're purling some, and then you're knitting these last 3 stitches. Those 3 are edge stitches right there. And then there's 1 more setup row to get us all set up. Knit your edge stitches. And at this point, if you want to, it's not in the pattern, but if you like to keep a marker to separate your edge stitches, and then you're going to knit 1. Then you're going to work a make 1 left to look for that bar between the 2 stitches. Pick it up, put it on your needle. For a make 1 left, we make sure it's slanting towards the left, and we knit it through the back leg. And that twists the stitch closed. We don't want an open stitch. We just want to increase the stitch right there. You place the marker there, and that separates your body of the shawl, this part, from that lace edging. And then we're going to do a little setup for our lace edging. We will knit 1, knit 2 together, yarn over, and then knit to the end. And then the next row, it's purling to those last 3 stitches and knitting 3. This shawl has 2 stitch patterns. The body of the shawl is the pepper pattern. It's just a simple stockinette fabric background with 2 rows of knit 1, purl 1 in there to give it a little bit of texture. The wrong side rows are always purled, and 2 of the right side rows are knit, and 2 of the right side rows are knit 1, purl 1, and then purl 1, knit 1 to give us the offset stitch pattern for the body, just for a little bit of interest. An optional idea is if you don't want any texture, just to do plain stockinette for the body. And then we have our lace edging. The stitch count changes, as you can see. We're adding some yarn overs to get that shape, and then extra decreases to decrease it back down to give us that zigzag edge. So you start by working your garter stitch edge, and then you move right into the pepper pattern. We're on row 1 of that pepper pattern, so it's just knitting across, and we only have 2 stitches. And then when we get to this marker, this tells us where our lace edging is, but it also tells us that we have to make an increase, and we're going to do another make 1 left. So there's that bar. Pop it up onto your left needle, going from front to back. That makes it lean off to the left, and then we knit it through the back loop, and that's a make 1 left. Slip that marker, and then you can start working your lace edging. You'll see that the lace edging and the pepper pattern, the wrong side rows are just purling across. So you don't even have to look at your stitch pattern. You're going to purl across all the stitches to those final 3, and you'll knit those final 3 to maintain that garter edge. There on the next right side row, we'll continue that pepper pattern. Now we're adding that texture. We'll knit the first stitch, and then we purl 1, knit 1 to the marker. And of course, there's only 2 stitches for that right now. We work our increase. We're working those increases on every right side row. And then we move right into our stitch pattern. I finished 1 repeat of the lace pattern. That's what it looks like right there on, well, this is worsted weight yarn, so it's a lot bigger. And the stitch count keeps changing on this little section, but you'll be back down to your original stitch count there. You'll have increased by 10 stitches in the body, so now you'll have 12 stitches here. And you're going to continue working that until you've worked this lace edging 8 times. And then at that point, you'll be increasing every time on the right side rows. So at that point, you'll have 82 stitches in the shawl body, plus your lace edging, plus your 3 stitches for your garter stitch edge. And at that point, you'll just continue working straight. You can see right here, there are no increases. The increases stop right there, and you work 3 repeats straight, and then you start decreasing. So let's look at that section of the pattern. Work your edging and your pepper pattern stitch wherever you are in the stitch pattern. I'm on a knit row. And when you get to those final 2 stitches before the marker, you're going to knit 2 together. So we're working the other way now. We are decreasing, and then you will continue working your lace pattern, the next repeat of the lace. So as for the increasing, as you decrease, you'll be decreasing 10 stitches from the shawl body each time until you are back down to your original stitch count. You'll have your 3 edge stitches, a couple of stitches in the body, and the lace edging, and you will finish that off and then bind it off. Now you can make this shawl with any weight of yarn you want. I was using a Craft Yarn Council medium weight for a worsted weight yarn to work that little sample. And that would have made a lovely shawl, but you don't want to run out of yarn before you finish the shawl. So there's one thing you can do with a tip-to-tip shawl that makes it super easy. You're going to need a kitchen scale. You're going to weigh the yarn you're planning to use for your shawl and write that number down, whether it's in grams or in ounces. And you're going to start by working the basic pattern with those increases. Now to make sure you have enough yarn to finish your shawl, you're going to keep track of the yarn you've used. You're going to keep weighing it as you're working and making sure that you can finish a full repeat of the lace edging and you still have more than half a skein left. When you get to that point, when you've finished a full repeat and you still have more than half a skein, you're going to start right in on the decreasing section. And instead of that slightly curved crescent shape, you're going to have a more tapered, almost triangle shawl shape, which is not a big deal, and it's perfect if you're concerned about running out of yarn. So it's super easy to adjust this shawl for any weight of yarn and whatever skeins you might have just by keeping track of how much yarn you have and just moving right to the decrease section. But you can also change the depth of the shawl. The depth of the shawl is created by working those increases and decreases. They are worked every right side row. You're increasing, and then when you're decreasing, you are decreasing every right side row. If you want a really deep shawl, then you could increase on every right side and every wrong side row right along that same spot on the marker. Of course, it's not in the pattern. You'll have to figure this out for yourself. But if you want a shallower shawl, then you could work increases on every other right side row. So you would have only 5 increases for every time you work a lace edging. So it's really easy to customize and change the depth of the shawl as well. So you can really make a truly unique shawl for yourself. So if you'd like to look at more tips for knitting shawls, take a look at the playlist I've linked right here where we look at all different types of triangle shawl patterns.